Welcome to the Tribe of Testimonies. Here you will find conversations with faithful Native American members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, sharing their stories and their love of the Savior. My name's Andrea Hales. I'm Navajo, and I'm glad that you've decided to come and join us today. My guest today is Matthew Azure. He reached out to me because I was a guest on a different podcast, and he just felt like I really would understand him and that he understood me. And so we were emailing back and forth for a while and then finally got our schedules to match. And so, we had this interview, this conversation, and it was so great. Some of the things that he talked to me about during the conversation and before the conversation just really moved me and touched my heart. And I'm so grateful that he has a testimony that has moved his decision making and a lot of things in his life. And I'm so grateful for that. I hope you enjoy this time that we got to spend together, because I did. Here's Matt. I'm on the phone today with Brother Matt Azure. I am so happy that he reached out to me recently, and so we've connected. Matt, would you please introduce yourself in your tribal way as much as possible? If it's in your language, great. If it's not, that's fine. Not everybody speaks their language, and some languages are dead.
My name is Matthew Azure. I am a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa in North Dakota. And my language is Michif. And Michif is a mixture of Cree, Chippewa, and French. And my grandparents spoke it, but they didn't pass it on to their children. But still today, Michif is spoken on Turtle Mountain, and Turtle Mountain is the greatest concentration of Michif speakers in the United States. And so I have relatives that never spoke English prior to going to school. They only spoke Michif. So that is our language, and it is also disappearing. But my grandmother would tell me stories of how her and Grandpa would want to talk to each other. They would use Michif, and the kids couldn't understand, so they could keep secrets with each other. And so I've looked into it. It's a very difficult language to understand and figure out, because you have so many different variants in there. And unless you were born with it, you'd really understand French and Cree and Chippewa, and then bring it all together and make it make sense for how they use it and everything. So
can you speak any words in Michif?
at one point my grandmother taught me some words, and I went to Alaska and spoke English, and I really struggled with that. So English is my first and only language, and I'm not a linguistic person. My children have had a daughter that went to Taiwan and learned Chinese and everything, but I got skipped over on knowing how to remember or use any other language. Hardly use the English language correct even. So, yeah.
Well, I'm with you on not having that gene that helps you understand things. I know it's gone.
Yeah.
So, would you share something that you love about your heritage as it relates to the gospel of Jesus Christ? It can be pretty much anything: a story, a celebration, a way of life, a ceremony, pretty much anything as it relates to the gospel.
Yeah, I'll tell you this story that happened to me. up here in North Dakota, there's a lot of us Turtle Mountain people all over, and became good friends with a woman that's, I consider her a medicine woman. She knows the ways, and she, um, anyway, we talk a lot about ceremonies and different things, and one day she said, "I'd like to do a smudge for you." And I said, "Okay, yeah, that sounds fun, interesting." And she said, "I'll come out to your place and we'll do that." And I said, "Okay." And so we arranged a time, and she came out, and she had her sage bundle and her abalone shell, and she said, "I need it over here." And then she lit the sage bundle, and got it smoking and stuff. And she started at my feet and pronounced some words, and then to my knee, midsection, and then to my head. And my mind is just racing. And I said to her after, I said, "Where did you get the words for that?" And she said, "They're the words that have been passed on." And it was basically the washing and anointing in the temple. This the same, starting at the feet, and and it was a confirmation to me that the fullness of the gospel was amongst our people at one time, and it is still partly there, because as you go to the different powwows and the different ceremonies and different, hear the words, and you'll hear the traditions, and you'll hear the things, and once you have the gospel in your life, you recognize where those things came, and you recognize that the truth has been restored, and that the fullness of the gospel is on the earth, and that our ancestors had that. And that was a real eye-opener to me, because I didn't grow up on the reservation, and I'd heard a lot of the stories and the different things and stuff like that, but that was the first time for my native culture to be that up close and personal to me, in that type of situation. And so that would be this, and then I'll tell you another story, and it concerns this same woman. We were we lived we were living in town at this time before we moved out to the ranch, and so I would see her a lot, because she worked in one of the stores that was kind of a slow. They didn't do much, and so we could visit and stuff. But anyway, so we would talk about things, and what she's doing, what I'm doing, and everything. One day I was talking with her, and she said, I perceive that you're a spiritual individual, and you take things very serious." And I said, "Well, thank you." And she said, "I would like to teach you the ways, and I'd like you to come to our ceremonies and sweats, and be involved." And I was kind of taken aback a little bit, and I thought for a moment, and I said, "Claudette, I thank you so much. It is a great honor that you've asked me to be a part of this." I said, "But I've chosen to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, and I cannot serve two paths." And she looked at me, and she said, "You are going to be true to who you love and worship." And she still includes me in a lot of stuff, and it didn't offend her. It didn't send her away. Yeah, she comes to me a lot, and we talk a lot about different things and everything. But it was shortly after that I was called to be a bishop, and I chose the proper master to serve. And it was an interesting thing to me, because I had run across a fellow years and years ago, that was native, that as I got to know his story and everything, I remember saying to my wife, this man is conflicted. He can't decide which world he wants to live in, either the gospel world or the native world. And sadly, he fell away and chose not to continue on the path of Jesus Christ. And it's like all these experiences had primed me for that very moment of who will you choose you this day, who you will serve. And I love my native heritage and I love the people, but I know who I serve and who I belong to. And I'm a convert to the church. If you like, I'd like to tell that story, if that's okay.
I actually was going to ask that next. So yes, please share that.
Okay. So on my mother's side, my grandmother came to visit us one day. She lived in Arizona and we lived in California at the time. And she brought the Book of Mormon. She had been converted by her brother. She brought us all Book of Mormons, individual, the bright blue Book of Mormons, And I had one, my sisters and my mom. Well, my mom and my brother joined the church quite quickly. My mom had been a chain smoker and had said, if the church is true, help me to quit smoking. And she put her cigarettes on the nightstand. And then the next morning was cleaning up and threw them in the garbage and then didn't even realize it till the end of the day. And she said, oh, I guess it's true. And so she joined the church. And my brother did with her. And I kind of held out because my dad and I are really close. And I didn't want him to be disappointed because he didn't want anything to do with it. But anyway, so my mom said to me, you need to go to church each Sunday. Either you go to mass or you go to church with me. And I said, okay. And I would hop on my little bicycle and I'd run off to mass. And I'd come back and then the next week I'd go to church with her. And this went on for several months. And then one day I was sitting in a fast and testimony meeting. And people were getting up and there was a guy standing there, saying, I don't know the words he was using at all. But the Spirit said to me, it's true and there's nothing you can do about it. And I turned to my aunt who was sitting there and I said, can I go up there? And she said, she knew, who I was. Her eyes got wide and said, no, and everything. But I wanted to stand at that point and say, I knew that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was true. And I wanted others to know that Spirit had come to me. Anyway, so I went to my father and I said, Pop, I want to join the church. And he looked at me and he said, yeah, it's a pretty big commitment. And I said, yeah. And he had grown up in Albuquerque and had lived actually in Farmington with some LDS people at one point. But anyway, he knew the church. He respected the church. And my dad's just he had the best sense of humor. But after we had started working construction together, I was 12 and I was already out working construction with him. But anyway, he said, I guess we won't be drinking coffee together anymore. And then he gave this laugh, that he always had, this funny laugh that he always had. And it broke the tension. And I knew it was going to be okay. So I joined the church and went on my way. My sister, my older sister, that's 6 years older than me, held out even longer than me. One day she comes to me and she says, so do you really think that church is true? And I said, I know it is. That's why I was baptized. And she said, well, I'm thinking about it. And I said, well, it is true. And that was the first opportunity I had to bear my testimony basically straight face to somebody, an individual is my own sister. And she joined the church and has, a beautiful family and everything. But I need to kind of go back to my father, also another experience through the years. Even after my parents, when I was 16, my parents divorced and stuff. But I always stayed in touch with my dad. He went back to Albuquerque, and we stayed in California, Arizona. But always stayed in touch with him, and prior to serving my mission, I went and visited him and stuff, and and then when I got married and everything, he would come up and visit and everything, and through the years he would come and stay with us for like 3 or 4 months at a time and stuff. And my aunt called me in 2005, and she said, "You need to come and see your dad." And I said, "Well, what's going on?" She goes, "He's not well. He won't tell you, but he's not well." So I made arrangements to go and see him. And I had been working in the temple on Fridays, and I was going to fly out right after my shift at the temple. And so I was in my suit and everything, and I fly into Albuquerque, and my dad picks me up at the airport and says, "I need you to see something." I said, "Oh yeah, what's that?" And he said, "Oh, you'll see. He drives me across town and drives me right up to the Albuquerque temple. And he says, "I watched them build this." He said, "And then I got to go inside and look around." He says, "It's amazing. You need to go in there." And I said, "Well, Dad, you don't just walk in and for no reason. No, you need to go in there just to see it." And he says, "You should see how when the sun hits it, it turns red." He says, "It's amazing." And I thought to myself, this man has spent a lot of time over here looking at this temple. And so I went to the front desk and said, "Can I look at your baptistry?" And my dad's not a member. He wants me to come and look at. So I just kind of looked around a little bit, talked with some of the patrons there, and then went back out. And he said, "Isn't that amazing? Isn't that?" And I said, "Yeah. And so the reason I was there too was to set up for hospice for him. So we had the hospice nurse that was there, and she was telling him all about all the services they have and everything. And he was dying. There was no question. He only had about a week. And so they were setting everything up, and she says, "Oh, and we have spiritual advisors." And he pointed his finger over at me and said, "He's my spiritual advisor." And so then through the following week after I came home, I'd call him up and I'd say, "Hey, this is your spiritual advisor." And we would talk and everything. And before leaving Albuquerque, I said, "Hey, I'd like to give you a priesthood blessing." He said, "Well, you already did." And I said, What? And it had been 5 years prior that I'd given him a priesthood blessing. He said, "That one really helped me and it's still in effect." And I said, yeah, it is. And I wish I had the faith that you have. But I gave him another blessing of comfort and peace. And he did pass very peaceful. And, and I talked to him about that he was going to have the opportunity to be with his brothers and his mom and dad and stuff. But anyway, so the gospel became the center of my life, let's just say. And it's interesting that with his passing, I inherited his share of our Indian trust land. My brother and sister are my half brother and sister, and I'm his only direct child. And so I inherited his share. And so when he passed, I came up to Montana to check it out, see what was going on. And then and then I came back, got my family, and we came up in the motorhome and stayed up here and looked around. And I said to my wife, I said, "What do you think of this place?" And she says, "We need to live here." Now, this is a girl that comes from the third wife of Brigham Young and has never left Utah County. And I was like, man, thank you. And we came up here, and so we live on our Indian trust land up here. And I dedicated this land to all that would come here would feel the Spirit of Christ. And I have a cousin that is part of the trust, and he's a Catholic priest. And he came up to visit, and we sat out on the bluff and watched the cows and, watched the sunset and everything. And he was here for a couple of days, and then he left. And then I get a phone call. He says, I need to let you know. He said, I've been on a lot of sabbaticals, a lot of retreats, a lot of religious things. I've never felt such peace and tranquility as I did with you and I sitting on the bluff looking at the cows and watching the sunset. And I thought, that's what it's about right there. That's what it's about, is making sure that our lives and all that we do are centered on Christ, and having that testimony of Christ and being willing to dedicate our very ground and our very lives to Christ. So
I love that story. That's I don't know, that's motivation, I think, for me to make my life like that too. So how many children do you have?
I have 8. I have 7 daughters and 1 son, and he's number 5. And he's named after my dad. After having 4 girls and then finally getting a boy, we kind of threw all the names onto him. So he's got my name, my dad's name, and my wife's dad's name. So we just, loaded him up. And then my dad was named Ben or Benedict. And so he was always called Ben or Uncle Benny or, whatever. One day he's up visiting, and my Ben is about 5 years old at the time. And he's crawling up on the table. And I kind of in a stern voice say, Ben. And my dad jumps. And I said, oh, okay, he's Benny, you're Ben. So we had to make those distinctions that, who was who. And another little funny story about when my dad would come up and visit, we had a gazebo in the backyard. And my dad would go out there and smoke and have his coffee and stuff. And one day I come home from work, and he says, your dog's not a Mormon. And I said, what? He goes, yeah, your dog's not a Mormon. He said, how do you know that? He said, I was out here having my coffee and a cigarette, and your dog jumped up on the table and started drinking my coffee and then ran off with my cigarettes. I said, oh, I guess he's not. That's why he's so wild, I guess. And again, that laugh that my dad had was there. And years later, and it was after my dad passed, we were tearing down that gazebo. And out falls from one of the rafters a pack of Lucky Strikes, filterless. And the emotion of that moment was pretty powerful, because it tied me back to a lot of memories with him. And even the week I went down to visit him, he kind of jokingly said, you guys thought the cigarettes would always get me, but they didn't. And he smoked the day he died. So it's, it was those Lucky Strike filterless. Oh my heavens. I don't know how he survived those, but anyway, he died of colon cancer, but anyway. So I was grateful that my children were able to grow up and be around my dad and the wisdom that he had, his life lessons that he taught me and everything. They stuck with me. They've stuck with me all my life. And it brings me back to, in the Book of Mormon. I gave him at one point. I gave him my original copy of the Book of Mormon, and he already knew it. he he and I have to tell you something about this. And I know this, this sounds like I'm just talking about my dad a lot, but he made me who I was, and made me know that if I made a commitment to anything, that I stick with it, and if I did something, I did my best. He says, even if you're a ditch digger, you be the best ditch digger there is. But anyway, and you be committed. So anyway, he would always encourage us in going to church, and and being faithful. And he would go to activities with us and everything when he was around. And when we lived in California, where we joined the church, the bishop used to be my dad's drinking partner. And when my mom walked into church and saw Tommy sitting on the stand, she said, if Tommy knows this church is true, it must be true. Because they had been out, they were drinking friends with this bishop and his wife before they joined the church. And so Tommy would come to my dad and say, hey, I need something for you and to do. And he was trying to fellowship my dad. And he got my dad out to the welfare farm to build the restrooms, because my dad was a Mason. He built the restrooms at the welfare farm. And then my dad would drag me out to the welfare farm to just work all the time. And I'm like, how much time? Because he knew everybody out there, and he knew what was going. I said, how much time are you spending out here? And he would surround himself with the good people of the gospel. So, but anyway, what I was saying was that my dad knew, I think he always knew that the gospel was true. And that kind of brings me into what I wanted to talk to you about next is genealogy.
Mm-hmm.
My family line was just the hardest. My mom's side was not so bad. My sister kind of took that side and ran with it. And so I struggled forever trying to find out. I couldn't get past certain generations and stuff, trying to find out where we came from, who we were, what we belonged to. And then after my dad passed, it was like he got there and he said to those folks, Matthew needs your help, and we need to help him out. And my patriarchal blessing says that my ancestors came to me asking me to make sure that their work got done, because they would not be on the earth prior to the gospel, or they would be on the earth prior to the gospel being restored. So I had this burden on my shoulders that I need to do this. The last thing I want to do is pass through the veil and have to look into their faces and say I didn't get it done. So we worked, and then after I don't know, I can't even remember what the first break was, but all of a sudden things started opening up. We found on my dad's mom's side and my dad's side, just stuff just kept coming and coming, and we were able to trace our heritage and who these people were, and to look at a census and see occupation, buffalo hunter, and one of our ancestors is John Baptiste Wilkie, and he was the first leader of the Turtle Mountain people. And he met with President Lincoln and different things, and he's basically a historical figure. And there's a lot of interesting stories written about him and the different things that they did. And it is so important that we be connected to our people that have gone before us. Just like in the Book of Mormon, where we read the words and we feel that spirit that we're connected to that book in such a special way. It's us that they're talking about, that they're preserving these records. And it's like in Mormon, in the words of Mormon, verse 11, he talks about how important it is for him to preserve the words, because he and his brethren and the generations to come will be judged by that book. and the words in that book. So you and I and all our people, we will be judged by the words of the Book of Mormon. And if we don't know that book, and if we don't understand it, that will be a hard judgment for us. And it's so important that we understand it. And for me, it has all the answers. You want to know how to raise your kids? Listen to King Benjamin. Do not let your children fight amongst themselves and serve the devil, are his words. You want to know how to treat your wives? Listen to what Aaron said about the Lamanites. They love their wives and their children, and they're faithful to them, unlike the Nephite men were at that time. There's the answers for all of our questions from the Book of Mormon. It will teach us and guide us. And we, as a Native people, have such a great blessing and the promises that are in it. If we will do the things that that book says, we will prosper in the land. And that, anytime I feel like, oh, am I not, it's usually because I haven't been reading the Book of Mormon enough. And then I bring that spirit back, and then my mind clears, and I feel better about what I'm doing and who I am. But I have a great testimony and love of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah. You and I yesterday were talking about like the restoration of our brothers and sisters and Native Americans, and you were identifying some key elements to that restoration. Can you remember those that you were telling me?
Well, I think part of that is and I mentioned to you, is the familiarity of the gospel. When the gospel came and was introduced to me, even as young as I was, it wasn't, what, a guy, what, prayed in the woods and golden plates, what? No, all that was secondary. The thing that was there was the truth. And that was familiar. It was so familiar. It was like, well, yeah, I already know this stuff. It was the veil being parted enough for me, and that familiarity coming to me, and that spirit coming to me, to know that that's the truth, and that it's what I already knew, that I already had in pre-existence, and it was just coming back to me, and the familiarity of it, and the Book of Mormon, and the familiarity of it, and the power of it. And it, as it says, that we will blossom as a rose. And I think, and it's interesting because up here in this country, there's an area called Pembina, and they have what we have grow on our property here a lot are the Pembina roses, and they're a wild rose, and they can endure a lot. We'll get 30, 40 below winters, and when the Pembina roses break through and come and blossom after all the trial of the winter and everything, and you see them, and they're kind of a low ground cover rose. They're not real tall, but they're amazingly beautiful. And that's how I envision that, is that we'll endure the trials, and if we are faithful and do the things that we should, we'll be as those Pembina roses, and break through the trials and be the people. And I should have marked this passage, but I was reading in the Book of Mormon just today of how we know these are the end times. We know that these are the last days. We are to open up and to be that light and that example to the world, and stand for what is good and right. And as I mentioned, you want to know about things and how you should run. The Book of Mormon has the answers, even right down to the politics. If you want goodness and blessings out of your government, then you need to be righteous people. And the Book of Mormon is rife with that. With all the times that they fell was because of their pride, and the leaders became wicked, and the lawyers and everybody else, and that's when they would fall. So we need to be that example, and that rose that people. We're not flashy. We're not the big, red roses and all, but we're still beautiful, and we have a lot to give as a people.
I totally agree with all of what you just said. So you kind of mentioned in passing a couple things, and you said that your dad taught you so many important lessons about life. Is there another lesson of life that you've learned from him, and how it has applied in your life?
Yeah, respect for other people. Everybody, prejudice them and stuff. People talk about it. I witnessed it firsthand because of my father and living where we lived and everything. I witnessed it and saw how people discriminated against him in certain areas and stuff, and the comments that they would make and everything. But I never heard my father disrespect another individual. He was always extremely respectful, and especially when it came to women. I remember one time we were at my grandmother's, and she'd made us breakfast, and the eggs were kind of runny, and I said something about it. And man, when we got in the pickup, he handed me my head. He said, "You never, ever, if a woman has taken the time to cook you a meal, you never complain about it. And especially your grandmother," And I knew, that, and my father was always so respectful and everything to women and stuff. So I learned respect. And I remember one time we were going to in a movie, and I was getting down the road, and I said excuse me to some people, but I guess my tone was not correct. And we were sitting in the seats waiting for the movie to start. And my dad said, "You don't use excuse me as a way to say get the heck out of my way." He says, "You need to be more respectful." And that stuck with me, and from that day forward, I watch how I say things, and I try to be respectful to people. And I learned, I guess, to sum it all up, and then this is a gospel thing, I treat people the way I want to be treated. The second great commandment, love thy brother as thyself. And so those life lessons. And then there's another one, proper tools for a proper job. He'd see me out there banging on something like a wrench that should have been a hammer. He'd come in and say, proper tools for a proper job, And so I always, look at something, and every time I pick up a crescent wrench and start banging on, I think, oh yeah, Pop wouldn't be happy about this. But anyway, yeah, he just a good work ethic, and if you're going to commit to something, be committed. Your word is your bond. Those types of things. Just normal life lessons, I guess, that I thought everybody grew up with, but I guess they don't. But and my grandmother taught my dad how to make fry bread. And I remember when I was a kid, my dad's in the kitchen, cooking something. And I said, what are you cooking? What are you cooking? And I was a little small kid. He said, surprises. I said, surprise? What surprise? He said, surprise. And I'm like, okay. So he cooked up the fry bread, and it was in different shapes and stuff. And so that's our tradition still, is that we have the fry bread, and everybody participates in making it into different shapes, about the size of the palm of your hand or a little bigger. And then you just make different shapes, and, turtles and ducks and whatever you want. And then that's the surprise. What does it turn out to look like? And fry bread is important in our native culture because the government doled out such meager rations to our people, but they turned it into something that made it so they could sustain life. And the Navajos have fry bread that is, the big fry bread, and our people have it so it's about the size palm size. And then my family took it to another level of turning it into a celebration situation, from the struggles that they came through to something of joy and happiness. And when we have family gatherings and stuff, we always have fry bread. And the way we do it is once you make the shape, you put it in the lard to cook. And once it's still really hot, then you put it in and smother it in powdered sugar and let that powdered sugar soak into that hot fry bread. And then you have, and it's amazing. It's so good. So we had a little sister missionary that was Navajo. She was having some struggles, and I brought her up to the house, and I made fry bread for her and stuff. And she was so grateful. And every time I'd see her after that, you'd say, "When are we going to have some more fry bread?" And everything. And so it's something that joins us together as a family. And I think a lot of Native people have that in their culture, in their family traditions.
I love that. That's so great. And I love that you just said that it helped somebody else feel a little bit more at ease and comfortable as well.
Yeah, she was really homesick and having a real hard struggle. And I know, and I had a lot of Navajo friends growing up and stuff, and I knew, that you get too far from the homeland, it's hard on them. So
yeah.
Anyway,
what is something hard that you have overcome, and how did you get through it?
I can tell you, I mean, I can be recent here. July 13th, I was on a motorcycle trip to meet up with a friend to ride the mountains of Montana. And I came to a corner and went to put on the brakes, and there were no brakes. And so I went off the road and broke my leg in 3 places. And the doctor said, I've got rods and plates and screws. And he said, yeah, one place your leg was like a sushi roll. He said, I had to take everything apart and redo it all and everything. And so just in the last 2 weeks, I've learned to walk again since July. And so I've had a lot of time. That's how I kind of basically came across your podcast, because I was, I can't watch TV. I just had to find something that would, help keep the spirit, keep my spirits up, let's just say. So anyway, that trial, that breaking my leg, though, what it did was made me cogitate on who I am, who I want to be, and where I'm going, and am I on the right path? And the biggest thing I came out with was I need to be more grateful. Because of the situation with my leg and everything, my foot would swell up and be very painful, and my wife would kneel down at the end of the bed and rub my foot out, and I would weep that I'm so blessed to have such an amazing helpmate and companion, and that I asked for forgiveness if I'd ever not shown my gratitude to her and to others enough. So sorry, but that's real close to me still at present. I am now walking with a cane, though. And I will get back on another motorcycle. So I have faith in God that he has blessed me with so many life lessons, and sometimes he needs to slow us down and make us reevaluate where we're at, where we're going, where we want to be. And you wouldn't think that it would be such a trial to have to sit home for all those months, but for a guy like me that's always been outdoors, and like where I live now, I can't see. The closest neighbor I can actually see is 5 miles away if I look down through the valley. And I have neighbors that are maybe a mile away, but they're hidden by the hills and stuff. And so I've always liked kind of being out and away from people. And being a bishop was one of the hardest things I ever did because I had to like people. But I did learn a lesson there that you can love people, and especially those people that need the gospel and that need the forgiveness of Christ. And those are the people that you end up loving the most, it seems like. So.
Well, I am uplifted with all the things that you've shared today. Unless there's something else, I have one final question for you.
I would like to say that I want to thank you for allowing excuse me, for allowing me to add my testimony to the tribe of testimonies. It means a lot to me, and I'm very grateful for you allowing me to have that privilege.
Thanks. Well, the final question is, what does it mean to you to know that you belong to the tribe of Israel?
That's that's really kind of an interesting question because due to the, having a white mother and a native father and looking more like my mother than my father, and kind of always feeling like I didn't belong to the tribe, let's just say. But then when I came up and lived amongst our people, then they just accepted me, and I'm part of the tribe now. I'm part of the people. And it's the same way with being a part of the house of Israel. We are going to be loved and welcomed, and we need to be loving and welcoming to others that are around us. And with our heritage, we have an extra added duty that kicks in with "to whom much is given, much is required." And we have been given so very much. So many Native people think that they're downtrodden and not blessed. And oh, no. We are so blessed. We are given so much. And the Lord's arms are wide open and with bounties in his arms for us. And that is part of being the tribe of Israel. And being able to then, in turn, bless others and help them. And that is a great responsibility that we have.
Thank you. I love that. That made me think just for a second that, like just a twist on it, that as Native people, it seems like we have a leg up closer to the gospel in some ways than maybe other religions if they convert. I don't know.
I concur. I do concur. You've listened to the many people that have been on your podcast, and when the gospel strikes us, man, and we hold on to it, it's an amazing thing. It really is. Because just as the people of Ammon, we hold on to the gospel. We have buried our swords. We have taken on that we want to be the people of Christ. And that's how I feel about it, is that I have buried that, and that I want to be ready to serve and do the things that the Lord wants me to do.
Well, thanks, Matt. It's been a pleasure, and I'm so happy that we could connect.
Same here. And I wish you all the best of luck in your future endeavors with what you're doing, and God will bless you in these efforts, I'm sure.
So last week I indicated things are not going well at our house. There's a lot of heartache going on right now. But my husband and I had a friend come over and give us priesthood blessings. And he told me that I have family who are literally with me all the time he didn't put it exactly in these words, but he said, because I've been trying to connect to them, they are connecting to me, and they're watching out for me and being with me. I teach a little class in my home every Thursday with some of my dear friends, and one of the things we were talking about was how this nation would be such a stronger nation if we learned stories about our ancestors and strengthened our families here on the earth today. And I just kept thinking as I had this part in our class time about the priesthood blessing that I had. And while that was a secular note in the lesson curriculum, it was a spiritual confirmation to me that our nation would be stronger if we knew our ancestors, because they know us and they want us to know them. And we've heard again and again that from prophets and from church leaders that we should do family history. And for a lot of us, that's hard. We just don't know how. We don't have the resources. We just feel like we hit dead ends. But maybe even if we don't know their names, if we just are so grateful for the people before us, that would strengthen our lives and in turn strengthen our nation. Anyway, I just wanted to share that with you, and I hope you have a super wonderful, awesome day. Tribe of Testimonies is not sponsored by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The music is a traditional hymn, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing, arranged and performed by Kyle Forsyth. I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear how this podcast is affecting you. And I'm always looking for guests. If you or someone you know would be a great guest, you can reach me at tribeoftestimonies@gmail.com.